Brothers, welcome to the session, 5 Things You Can Do to Improve Your House Corporation Operations. We'll get started here in just a second. I'd ask if you're don't mind that you would mute yourself so we don't have distractions from background.
This is Vincent Angelo, the Upsilon Alpha chapter, University of Arizona. I'm treasurer of the House Corporation.
Hi, Vince.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Did you enjoy the opening session?
Unfortunately, I just got home.
Oh, okay, got it. Great. Well, welcome. We're glad to have you. All right. So, brothers, I think we'll get this kicked off in a second. Dio, are we ready to record?
All good to go, Steve.
Okay. All right, brothers. Good afternoon. My name's Steve Bocher, and as most of you heard in the opening session, I have the privilege of serving as the chairman of 1848 Housing. And today our session is entitled 5 Things You Can Do to Improve Your House Corporation's Operation. Quick overview. Dio, oh, there we go. Our goals for this session really are 5 things. We're going to talk about creating your vision, being committed to improving the member experience, having better communications, being fiscally responsible, and having a plan. My hope is that we'll have time at the end for questions and answers. At that point, you can unmute yourself and ask questions directly. So let's just jump into our content. Again, I want to give a quick warning. Every house corporation is different. You may already be killing it. So I don't know what your specific state of affairs is at your specific chapter, so bear with me. Some of you may be ahead of the game in some of the areas I'm going to cover. Others, this may feel overwhelming and daunting, but we'll get through the content together, and we'll also hopefully be able to add value to everybody that's watching or listening in on this presentation. So the first thing I want to talk about is creating your vision, and there's some important things for us to talk about here. Some of them actually really fun, coincide with some of the things that our keynote speaker just addressed. So many of our house corporations are just stuck doing the same thing year after year. And as I alluded to in my opening comments, that really means you're probably going backwards. What we understand about housing is that first and foremost, your property itself ages. And so aging usually means deterioration. So if you're just kind of maintaining a status quo, your property is getting older and older. It's getting closer to the end of its useful life, and you're not advancing your situation, just being in kind of status quo. The housing market, we've seen a renaissance in many parts of the country. I don't know if that's going to be the case in the areas where you are, but we're seeing universities invest millions of dollars renovating their dorms, changing them in, building new dorms with, quad living, men having a bedroom and bath, and then a common living area is one of the common formats that we're seeing. We're seeing, in many cases around college campuses, a boom of new apartment style living accommodations being built. And so, again, if we're just maintaining the status quo and everything around us is advancing and improving, we're going backwards. So part of what we want to talk about is, what is your vision for the future? If you can articulate that, that's really an important first step. in terms of whether that vision is in respect to occupancy, finances, ranking or position of fraternity houses on the campus. We need to be able to start by saying, what is our goal? Where is it that we're trying to head? So that way, then we can benchmark our decisions against, is that decision advancing us towards our future goals or vision? I'm a believer that you have to have that written down. Yeah, I mean, it has to be something that you can reference, and it's not sort of just stuck in your head. If you're the House Corporation president, it needs to be written down so you can share it with your board members. You can share it with the BCA. You can share it with the Purple Legionnaire, and you can share it with the undergraduates. And then communicating it. Have you told anybody? It's great to have a vision, but you don't hold yourself accountable if you and the board are the only people that know what that vision is. So it's important to be courageous and confident in what that vision is, and to make sure that you share it and tell people about it. And you should be talking about it frequently, in my opinion. One of the things that we know is that housing can make a huge difference, good or bad, for a chapter. And we, of course, want housing to be a positive for every chapter. But if your house is in a situation sort of like what Dave alluded to in Kansas State, where it's in disrepair, the food's mediocre at best, nobody wants to live there, you have to acknowledge that that's going to be a distraction to every other aspect of their programming, whether it's recruitment, scholarship, philanthropy. If they're not proud of being a Phi Gam and the mission of Phi Gamma Delta, because they live in a rundown, not desirable kind of house, that's going to, at a minimum, distract them, right, from getting the undergraduate experience that maybe we had or that we want them to have. So I think that's really important to see. So as we work on creating our vision, the things that I want you to think about is, first and foremost, think about membership experience, the member experience. What would be a great member experience in respect to housing? And obviously safety has got to be paramount to that, right? Nobody is gonna, I saw some faces, some of you have your cameras turned off now. Some of you you're old enough that you have kids. If you don't have kids, imagine having a kid. You certainly would want your son to be going into an environment that is safe. And they're not at risk or in jeopardy just by their mere presence in the structure. So as we create this vision, we have to have safety be paramount of the concern. But then what else? What else are the aspects of member experience that we want? Do we want them to have excellent food? Do we want them to have study areas? Do we want them to have a good social experience? So do we need facilities and amenities that cause brothers to want to gather at the house and be together and get that fraternal experience? So as you create the vision, you're gonna incorporate lots of different elements. I'm like Dave. I want you to think big. What would your vision look like if you had the best house on campus? And by the way, one of the things that sometimes happens, if you haven't seen the other houses on campus, you need to go make arrangements and tour those. Whether you do that through maybe the chapter president and do that, or contact your peers at some of the other house corporations. If you don't understand what the other chapter houses look like and how they're being operated, that's critical for you as you create your vision. And don't confuse that newest means the best. right? You may be in a situation where some chapters or some, I guess chapters have rebuilt houses, and your house is 20 years old or 30 years old, and somebody has a brand new facility. Yeah, certainly there's advantages to new, but how well it's run has nothing to do with newness. And so, and the passion and the vision of the house corporation has nothing to do with newness. So we can kill it by doing a great job running and operating a house, even if it's 20 years old, and I think still be one of the best houses on a campus competing against maybe a brand new structure. As Dave alluded to in his keynote, sometimes this takes courageous leadership. You have to, if you're the house corporation president or if you're a board member, you need to take a stand from time to time. And you need to be willing to say, hey, this is not a negotiable if I'm going to be involved with the house corporation. And I think with courageous leadership and a great vision, virtually anything is possible. And I think the Kansas State story is proof of that. I mean, there's not really any more bleak situation than what Dave described 2 years ago at Kansas State. No money, bad house, no, not an effective house mother, poor maintenance. I mean, in some cases, that's the sad tale of so many chapter houses around the country, not just with Phi Gamma Delta. And yet in 2 years, Dave was able to turn that around. So I think that's a great encouragement, should be a great encouragement to all of us. So let's talk about the next topic, which is commitment to improving member experience. What are some of the areas that includes? Well, we already touched on safety. We really need to be conscientious about safety, and we need to be unwavering in our rules about safety. There's just not an excuse to be sloppy in this area. The fire panel needs to be operational. The fire extinguishers need to be in place. The smoke detectors need to be working and tested regularly. We can't store bikes and golf clubs and skis and all sorts of personal property in stairwells where if somebody, if the fire alarm goes off at 2 a.m. and the power is off and it's smoke filled, that people could trip and fall and pile up in a stairwell and result in injury or death as brothers are trying to exit a building. I mean, we just have to be unwavering with this, and we have to use common sense, brothers. I'd encourage you, if you don't have your mind made up on all your sessions, listen to the session from Holmes Murphy on liability. Hundreds of brothers have fallen off roofs. Well, hello. Can you be in an apartment complex and have access to a roof? I don't think so. If you live in a dorm, do they give you access to the roof? I don't think so. So why would we give access to the roof to our brothers or our residents? Let's call them in that case, right? It's common sense. And so we need to be committed to taking those common sense steps and making sure that we have a safe structure. One of the things that I think we learned from Dave Schreck's keynote address is not also trying to do everything yourself. I would tell you in my years involved in house corporations, other than the fact that I thought I wanted to be a hotel restaurant management major as a freshman, I didn't have expertise in food service, and probably most of you don't. It's crazy to think that you can supervise food service yourselves. I mean, how many of us know what the proper holding temperature is for cold or hot food, or how long food can be kept in a refrigerator, or how, what is the appropriate cleaning process? But those are the things you have to know to be able to manage somebody and see somebody if you're hiring them directly. It's crazy. And so we have a great partner in Upper Crust, and I would encourage you to look into using them, because we can't do everything ourselves. We just don't have the bandwidth and we don't have the expertise. So as you're looking at member experience, Dave's point of saying, hey, food service can be a huge differentiator for your chapter is so true. And there's no better way to make the men happy and excited than to give them excellent food and lots of it. And that can be accomplished. And that can be a real game changer for a chapter, and an easy one potentially to be, hey, the Phi Gam's got the best food of any fraternity on campus. Thinking about the amenities. No, we're not, no pools. Let me just say we're not building pools. And we're probably not going to have a health, we're not going to have a workout, center. We can't compete with some of what a private sector, let's say apartment complex, may do when it comes to amenities. But we should have good fraternity appropriate amenities and get input from the men what those are. Certainly great internet service is important, an area for them to gather together to watch, TV, whether it's football or whatever that they want to watch, some study areas, maybe it is a pool table or a foosball table or some combination of entertainment type of things, reasons for guys to want to hang out at the house. But we should be talking to them, asking them what those amenities are, and working to accommodate those. Cleanliness. I have to tell you, this is an area that I think, again, can be a huge differentiator. And we need to also understand that the rules have changed. Whatever year you were in college is, I can tell you, different than what the men expect today, right? The days of Animal House, the days of, beer permeating, through every pore of wood surface that's in the house is not the standard that we need to have when it comes to cleanliness today. This generation is different. We don't have to judge it bad or good. We just have to understand that it's different. And what I want to encourage you to do is change your benchmark. Understand what the students are expecting. And then I want you to put yourself in the position of either the parent of that student, or I want you to imagine your wife, your spouse, or your daughter going into the house and thinking, what would their assessment be of the cleanliness of the house? And if it's, ooh, this is disgusting, then we've got the wrong standard happening in our chapter houses. So we need to get out of using our own personal experience and saying, yeah, our house was never clean, but it was great. I loved it. That's not a standard that I think we can afford to use any longer. So think about not just what the students expect, but put yourself as either a parent or your spouse or daughter and use that as your filter for what the standard of cleanliness should be. And then last area of member experience of academics. Is there good support for academics in the house? Is there a place to study? Is there, a library or other spaces, computers that brothers can use, printers to print out papers and things like that? Okay, we also want to think about, in terms of member experience, who has the responsibility for certain tasks? And I want you to think about that in the sense of determining if you're going to be able to get the changes you want, expect, or need. So let me explain this in another way. If your goal is to have the best food on campus, the question is, who is in the best position to get that accomplished? we just consulted, 1848 Housing just consulted with a house corporation. I won't tell you which one. And their history had been that the men hired the chef, managed the food budget, and oversaw kitchen operations. And while 1848 Housing doesn't have a firm position to say you can't do that or you can do that, the question that we raised was with that group of house corporation men was, is the kitchen operating at the level that you want it to be operating? And their answer was no. And then our comment was, well, who's in a better position based on experience and maturity to get you to where you need to be? Is it going to be the undergraduates, or is it going to be one or a group of the graduates that takes on that responsibility of overseeing kitchen operations? And that's what we need to be thinking about in all aspects of the house. We have some house corporations that leave cleaning to the men, and the men hire the cleaners, they supervise the cleaners, they determine how much they want to spend on cleaning. And then we have other house corporations that they take on that responsibility. And so again, I'm not here to tell you that however you're doing that, whichever method is right or wrong. What I'm asking you to do is filter in, is the work happening at the level that you expect, the level that you want, the level that you need to achieve your vision, and then make a decision whether you need to change that process up. Okay, does that make sense? Hopefully, everybody. And then, common sense, and that particularly when it comes to safety. So think about, access to the roof. Think about alarming access to fire escapes. We have men that fall off fire escapes every year because they're using that as a back door to the house. Well, is that good for safety and security? Probably not. Is that good for just general safety, having people use a fire escape as a daily method of entering a property? Probably not. So just common sense. Just as you use common sense to say, hopefully we don't allow candles in the property, or we don't allow permanent extension cords to be used in the property, right? Those are just common sense safety things that come up in your fire inspections or in your university inspections. So using common sense is really important. All right. The third thing that I want to talk to you about is better communications. Better communications includes really three areas we're going to talk about. First is having better communications with the BCA and your Purple Legionnaire. I was fortunate to be able to do a presentation at the Academy a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about this and encouraged the BCA and the PL to engage more with the House Corporation. I think our history in the fraternity is that we've siloed the House corporations and the PL and the BCA. And some of that is appropriate. We need to have some of that still occur for legal liability reasons. But there also is an importance to have good interactions and a sense of team when it comes to the overall benefit of the chapter. And so it's important, if you don't already have this, that you establish some connections with the PL or the BCA. You need to use them to get feedback and not be offended and not feel like they're getting in on your turf, right? Because they're in many cases going to be spending more time at the physical chapter house than some of our House Corporation board members are, right? Because, the BCA and the PL may be over there every day for a period of a couple weeks during rush, supporting rush. So they're going to see things and hear things from the men that maybe a board of of a House Corporation member might not hear, because they're not going to be around in that frequency and duration of time. So we should expect them to share information with us. And conversely, we need to share our plans with them. And so, and we need to hold each other accountable. That if you shared that you're going to clean the carpets and do some painting over break, you shouldn't mind that they hold you accountable to make sure that got done. And similarly, if you're talking to them and talking about chapter behavior issues and how the chapter needs to be counseled because they're causing damage, you should be holding them accountable to make sure that they're communicating those things and taking steps to help the chapter change its behavior. So that's really important. Also, with the chapter, hopefully all of you are meeting regularly with the entire chapter. At least annually, the House Corporation should be spending time at a chapter meeting, talking to the chapter, talking about expectations and the roles, and what's going to make for a good relationship between the House Corporation and the chapter. And then in between the entire meeting with the entire chapter, you should have communications with the officers, house manager, and your house director if you have one. So that's really important as well. And then graduate communication. And this is a new area. So I want to touch on this for a second. And that is, it's essential that the House Corporation does a good job having regular communications with the graduates of the chapter. You guys as House Corporation officers are the stewards for the asset. You're not the owner, you're the board that runs the asset on behalf of all the graduates from that chapter, right? Because it's the chapter's property. And so you're the people running it, and every member of that chapter is your shareholder. Think of yourself as a corporate board, right? So corporate boards are responsible to hold themselves accountable, to be transparent to their shareholders, and your shareholders are the graduates of the chapter. So you need to have regular communication with them, updating them on what your plans are, updating them on the health of the asset, and keeping them posted. You'll also hear this if you attend the fundraising presentation by Columns. We know, this is a fact, that if you don't have regular communication with your graduates for a period of 2 years minimum prior to trying to do fundraising, the fundraising doesn't work as well. And so you can imagine, right? If the first communication you've gotten from the House Corporation is, hey, we need money, the response rate isn't going to be so good. So not only is it your duty as a board member to communicate to your shareholders, it's also essential for fundraising down the road. So the better the tradition that you create of communicating, the better 5 years from now or 3 years from now or 10 years from now you're going to get when it comes to reaching out to your peers to help with a major fundraising project. Fourth area that I want to touch on is being fiscally responsible. I struggled with that heading, so I apologize if that maybe that's not talking about being, whether you're honest and trustworthy. It's about using good business practices in your finances. One of the things, one of the points is rent should cover all your costs, and your costs are not just what your mortgage is and the utility payments and your property taxes. It's all the costs associated with properly managing your house. And that means, are you covering the cost of long-term renovations or replacement of items? So you'll see the third bullet fourth bullet, completing your reserve study. A reserve study basically allows you to look at all the assets of your house, determine what the remaining life is, and then collecting or knowing what the allocation you need to have annually to replace that asset at the end of its life. So real quick example, you've just replaced your roof and it was $30,000. You expect your roof to last 30 years. You use a reserve study, it calculates an inflation factor. You can determine what that is. And 30 years from now, I'm making this number up, by the way, that replacing your roof is going to cost you $50,000. So then what you need to do is calculate what 1/30th of that cost is. So roughly $1,500 a year, $1,600 a year. And that's part of your cost that you factor into rent. So it's not now just your mortgage and your taxes and your utilities, but it's 1/30th of the cost to replace your roof, because 30 years from now, you're going to need 50 grand to replace your roof. And the brothers that lived in the house this year benefited from having a roof, and it's that's their share of that cost. Does that make sense? So you want to have all your costs covered. And so as you calculate that cost, it's the cost of the roof, it's cost of updating the kitchen, replacing stoves, replacing furniture, it's the cost of repaving the parking lot. All those things are factors that should be covered in your rent. And so we want you to make sure that you're charging market rates. Market rates, in my opinion, are you should be looking at what the dorms are charging, what the apartments in the surrounding area are charging. And as a general sense, your goal should be to be within 10% of what those entities are charging. And then being fiscally responsible means having adequate cash reserves. Don't need to tell any of you guys here today, COVID was scary. We didn't know whether we were going to have houses open or have houses closed. So do you have adequate reserves for a situation where the house has to close and you can hang on for 6 months or 12 months without any income, rental income, or an unexpected repair? The boiler goes out and it's only in year 10 and you expected it to live to year 30. Do you have the money to cover an expense like that? So those are things that we want you to include. And then use the standard of running your house corporation like you would your own business or your house. My guess is each of you don't, have money set aside for an unexpected repair. You plan and have a plan for improvements and know that you're going to get, a new refrigerator or a new carpet. While our house corporation should run the same way. Safe bet, most of our house corporations are probably undercharging. And they think their goal should be to be charging as little as possible. And that hamstrings you from being able to do the things that you need to do to be successful running the house corporation and having a property be the way you want it to be. And sorry, I just lost my screen. Yikes. Let's see, get back to where I need to be. Sorry about that. But I'm not doing good here. Help Dio. All right, I think I'm back. Okay, good. Sorry about that. All right. The last area that I'm going to touch on real quickly, we're real close on time, is do you have a plan? And so the areas that I want you to think about here are really three kinds of plans. One, do you have a maintenance plan? Do you have a document that shows when you're going to do different kinds of planned maintenance? If you don't, I want to encourage you to develop that after the conference. When are you going to do, how frequently do you clean the carpets? How often do you deep clean the bathrooms? When do you do painting? What are the yard care plans? When do you do upholstery cleaning on couches and chairs? How often and when do you do your refinishing on hardwood floors? those plans are important. Hardwood floors, great example. If you can do skim and recoat on hardwood floors, as opposed to have to do sand and refinish, that's a fraction of the cost for maintaining a hardwood floor, and extends the life, right? You only have, so many sandings before the floors are no longer viable. So by keeping up with the maintenance and skimming and recoating in between sanding and refinishing, you can extend the life of your hardwood floors by decades, literally. So those are the kinds of things that you should have, and there's a longer list than that, obviously, but of maintenance. And again, that's the kind of thing that you can share with the chapter so that they know when it's going to be happening, and the BCA and the PL. Do you have a renovation plan? Again, if you don't have one of these, I'm going to encourage you to do that as well. First thing you need to know about your renovation plan is, what is the expected life of your property? Most in commercial construction, they talk about 50, 75, 100-year life kinds of construction. That's based on the materials that were used when they built it, the plan, I hate to say planned obsolescence, I don't know that's really the right term, but that there's certain materials and things that only will last for so long. So you need to understand, what kind of structure do you have? Do you have a 50-year structure or a 100-year structure? And then based on that, understand where you are in the life cycle to know that your property is ending its life. You might be year 45 in a 50-year structure. Well, that's important for you to know, because that means that probably in 5 to 10 years, you're going to need to scrape and rebuild that house. That when you go to do your next renovations, what's going to happen is the contractor is going to say, it doesn't make sense to renovate this property because it's at the end of its life, and it's going to cost more to bring it up to code than it would be to scrape and rebuild it. Well, that's powerful information for you to have. So you need to understand the expected life of your property, and then you need a plan for major renovations or minor renovations. What's the schedule? When's the next time the kitchen needs a major overhaul? The bathrooms need a major overhaul. So those are the kinds of things that you should have plans for, so that you can be anticipating whether you have the cash on hand to do that, or that you're going to need to do fundraising, or that perhaps those plans don't make sense because of the age of your property and you need to do a major overhaul. So those are two of the three kinds of plans. The last plan is a succession plan. You need to, plan, if you're the president of your house corporation, you need to be thinking about who's going to take over for you when you're ready to step down. And so you need to be developing board members, and you need to be growing the group so that when you're ready to step down, that the house corporation isn't left with no one to take over. So brothers, that's the 5 points that I wanted to cover. I'm sorry to say that I was long-winded and didn't leave a lot of time for Q&A. I believe we're pretty much at time here. Dio, do we have any time for Q&A, or are we done?
Yes, Steve, since we went a little 5 minutes over in the opening, let's allow 5 minutes for questions and answers. And
Okay.
We'll take a 5-minute break before the next breakout session.
Sounds good. Does anybody have any questions that they want to bring up, or comments or thoughts? Just unmute yourself and.
Hey, Steve, this is Adam Bashaw here. Quick question for you. One thing that really intrigued me was the idea of contacting other houses of other chapters and kind of sharing best practices or anything like that. Do you ever run into any? How does that usually go when you approach the other housing corporations? And in your experience, how's that worked out?
Great. Hey, Adam. First, hello. Adam's a brother from my chapter. Thank you for joining us today. Yeah, I think there's generally, my experience is they're very open. You know, I attend some housing conferences from that will have representatives from 80 to 100 fraternity and sororities, and they share openly with each other. I've received full plans from other international, you know, organizations on how they're addressing things. And I think locally, I think we found that they're very willing to do tours to discuss, you know, who they use for food service or who they use for property management, or, you know, how they've overcome challenges. And so, you know, obviously every local situations can be slightly different, but I think you'd be surprised. And it's critical, right? You have to know what the competition is doing, and not necessarily because you're going to copy everything, but you just need to have an understanding of where you are in your marketplace, right? That's how any business operates, and our house corporations are businesses.
All right, thanks a lot, Steve. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Adam. Any other questions?
Steve, a question. It's Brian Gravitt from Miami University. In the communications, you didn't mention parents, and I wonder if anybody's, you know, I think that it's almost expected from parents these days that you're holding a Facebook account and sharing pictures and, you know, all those kinds of things.
Yeah. That's a great point, Brian. And especially with COVID, honestly, right? We've improved our graduate communications with parents. They, I'm sure, you know, have had lots of concerns about cleaning practices and safety at the chapter. And so that is definitely important. You know, there, and just as a quick explanation, right? There's really what we haven't done well or discerned is the difference between undergraduate communication and graduate communication. And with, you know, the recognition is that hopefully our chapter is sending out their newsletter and doing that kind of communication. What we need to understand, and you can appreciate this, you look like you have a few miles under your belt, right? Is that the undergraduate communication is great. How exciting is the rankings in flag football to you today compared to maybe when you were you know, just recently graduated? Yeah, not so much, right? I mean, those things they get oh, okay, great, we're so good in flag football. But what we need to understand is we need to engage our graduates from various decades, because some of our chapters are fortunate to be 20, 30, 50, 75, 100 years old. So they're going to have graduates that range from 22 or 21 to 80. And so, you know, we need to be thinking about that engagement and saying, okay, what's a brother that's graduated 40 years ago going to want to know about the chapter or their chapter brothers, and not just, well, our GPA, you know, not the undergraduate stuff. GPA is X and our intramural status is Y, and we're doing an exchange with sorority Z. That's okay. That's part of the game. But as graduates, we need to engage at a different level with different information, and that's something that really hasn't been developed well by the fraternity, which is kind of surprising, you know, given we've been around for 170 years. So yeah, Vince.
Yeah, Steve, I've listened to your presentation, which is very nice, but I have some questions. We at Arizona, we undoubtedly have the best physical plant of any fraternity on campus. It's new, it's in good shape. We have a food service provider. We have amenities. We have cleanliness. We have a study room, which we just renovated for $40,000.
Nice.
We have, you know, Wi-Fi that's optic. It's optic supported. all of the things you just mentioned, a GPA of 3.338, yet with a chapter of 115 men, we're still having difficulty getting 50 men to live in the house. And the question is why? And one thing that hasn't been mentioned, and it has to be mentioned, is that the fraternity house is no longer the hub of social activity like it used to be. Now, why? The men are choosing to have their social activities off campus. And the amenities, we can't compete with the new high-rise apartments and that sort of thing in many ways, but the elephant in the room is that these men, just like in the past, want to be able to have a beer, and they can't.
Yeah.
And they can't. And believe it or not, this is a big factor in why they don't want to live in the house.
Yeah.
And I do support, I noticed since we've gone to a no alcohol policy, you know, the damage in the houses has ebbed and that sort of thing. But at the same time, we have difficulty getting 50 men to live in the house out of a chapter of 115.
Yeah.
And it'll soon be up to 130 with spring recruitment.
Yeah.
I just don't know what the answer is here, but somehow we've got to get the chapter house back as the hub of social activities.
Yeah.
And until we do, it doesn't matter. We've got, as I said, a state-of-the-art facility, but we can't get the men to live in. They just want to live in their apartments and high rise and that sort of thing because they don't have the restrictions that we have in the house.
Yeah.
And
let me just real quick, and we can continue this conversation offline. But I think there's a couple of things that come to mind. I think part of that is probably right. I think part of that also is there's something else there because I don't care, I don't care who you are. You don't drink a beer every day, every hour, while you're, living your life in college. You can consume a lot of beer. I get that. But, it's not a 7-day a week, 24/7 kind of thing that, hey, I get home and I go in my apartment and the first thing I do is go to the refrigerator and pop a can open. So I think there's some other issues probably at play that we need to kind of figure out and understand. Number one. Number two, we also have to change the culture and the understanding of what the rules are and be more clear with the chapter. The rules are we need 50 men in the house, and you don't have an option if you're a sophomore or a junior or whatever the class you want to, however you want to do it. Everybody has to live in for 2 years. And that's part of the price you pay for getting the other good parts of being a FIGAM. And we have to be courageous about that and hold people accountable to that. And unfortunately, we're out of time, but I'd love, for you to engage with 1848 Housing or DO and from the staff, and we can hopefully try to help you and your group address this. And I think it's not without challenges, but I think it is surmountable. So thank you for that question, Vince. Brothers, we're at time, so take a couple minute break and then use your conference agenda to link into the next session. I appreciate you joining me in this session, and thank you very much.